That was a piece by Dumi Marari, who's from Zimbabwe, Shona people, and a friend and mentor teacher from 30 years ago who just died last year. So I thought it would be an appropriate person to sort of do entry into this. We're going to be looking at patterning in time, which is playing with the creative systems notion of how human systems creatively evolve. And that means really the realities, the felt senses, the cognitive spaces that we are taken through in any kind of developmental progression from a creative systems perspective. At the same time, in a way, we're going to be playing with patterning in space. And it really is the case in listening to this music. There'll be times for different ones of you as a function of your temperament in which you're going to listen to a piece and you may have never heard music from that place in the world before. And it may just feel like Come Home to Mama to you, you know. And you may hear another piece and it may not be that different, and it is like fingernails on a blackboard, you know. And so really be open to all those huge variation of responses, because that's how you relate to the whole of creative complexity within yourself, being mirrored in that. There's no good, bad in all of that. It's sort of finding yourself in the map of complexity. One of the things that really is unique about creative systems theory as a frame for looking at complexity is that we really do use the same language and lenses for looking at patterning in time, developmental tasks, as we do patterning in space, which has to do with diversity in the here and now, okay? And what that really allows one, I mean, it may seem like a minor thing to begin with, but what it really allows you to do is to step into a human system and that has immense complexity to it, multi-layered, multi-dimensional, so darn many you can't even keep track of it all in your head, and be able to address it kind of with a single brushstroke. There's a way in which it becomes simple, okay? It's not simple in a way you can hold in your head, okay? But to the degree you can hold the whole of yourself in terms of your cognitive complexity, which is what this is about, okay? To that degree, to the degree you're able to bring your body, your imagination, your emotions, your thoughts into what you're using as the sensor, the thing to read what's going on, to that degree you can make things relatively simple. I'll tell you, one of my litmus tests as a goal for today, okay, and we're going to have a whole day together, is I would love it to be the case that after this experience, you folks could walk into a room of people you don't know, doing something you don't know, and go, huh, but there's quite a bit of middle axis in this room. I wouldn't have expected that. And pick that up from the intonation in the room, the quality of relationship, the quality of people's voices. In a sense, what's the music that's playing in this room? Okay? So that's what we're going to learn how to listen and play at that level. Our focus is going to be on the creative process of culture. And that's a radical notion to begin with, that culture is even a creative process. Okay? So, let yourself be doubtful. Let yourself be convinced. And be hard to convince, because that's part of how you learn, and that's part of the test that this kind of material needs to be run through. One thing you'll find in terms of how we look at history here, it's going to be different than we're used to looking at history from a history class. Because history class tends to look, from a creative systems perspective, at history, at the human story through a late axis lens. Okay? So what do we call history? Well, we call history a chronicling of inventions, leaders, wars. Okay? But those aren't the thing that's important if you're an early axis culture, or if you're a pre-axial culture. I mean, they might be there, but if they did write things down, they wouldn't have written them down. Okay? So hopefully with each stage, we're going to allow its unique voice to be forefront, to tell us about the reality of that stage, rather than attempting to see all the stages through a lens that really can't see them. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. I should say with this, and this is something that's important to bear with, what I'm going to be presenting is enormously simplistic, okay? for me, often just embarrassingly so. And the thing to remember is we're being simplistic for a good cause. Okay? We're playing with the art of seeing large pattern. Okay? And we could take any part of that pattern and explode it out and look at incredible detail, but we'd be here for 7 or 8 days if we want to do that. So bear with that simplification. I think there's an interesting art in working with something like creative systems theory about almost a willingness to step in and see big pattern in a way that we're very uncomfortable doing at our time in culture. So that to be able to make those big brushstroke simplifications that really aren't simplistic, that really sort of get at the core of what's happening in the situation, I think is much of our task, because that's much of our task in our time. How do we understand our moment in history in a similar way? What is fundamental? What are the creative questions that define our time in history? Okay. A few more words before I primarily stop talking. For folks who have some particular interest in music itself, are there a number of people who are musicians or just spend a lot of time with music in the room? Okay. Let me say a few things that are really more musicological. Okay. And they are fascinating too, and everybody can watch them. They won't be what's primary what we're doing. But if you look over the course of the history of music, there's a number of variables that evolve in very specific ways over the course of history. So even if you couldn't hear it, you could use these variables to figure out where music's coming from. Okay. A couple of them are really more sociological and musicological. One is we're moving from a time where music is participatory. I mean, if you're in a tribal reality, you may not know all the dances and all the music, because different people with different roles are going to have different dance and different music, but you're going to dance and know the music, or you won't be part of your tribe. Okay. Compare that to now, where it's okay, most little kids, we expect them to make music. But once you're an adult, unless you're a professional, you don't make music. And even if you are a professional, you're a little bit suspect. Okay. That's a very different role of music within the psyche of culture in those different times. Another thing that happens is that in early stages in culture, there's a much greater interweaving between dimensions of culture. So you might have music and art and dance happening, and you can say, well, which is it? I'm not sure which it is. And then you say, well, it's also spirituality, and it's also politics. In a way, it's sort of all happening there at the same time in the enactment of a mythic drama, part of the Ramayana or something like that on stage, okay? In our time, those are highly differentiated, okay? So if you want to see art, you go to an art museum. If you want to do religion, you go to a church. If you want to do government, okay, got it, okay? Those are more sociological. Within the music itself, a number of variables. One is music goes from being cyclic in its structure to more linear in its structure. Okay? So if you're listening to a symphony in modern times, it may have movements in it, okay, with some sense of sort of gestural connection, but it's very rare to have absolute repetition within symphonic music. Go all the way back to tribal music, and there you are going to have often very small cycles, 4 to 5 beats, over and over again, almost like a water wheel turning. So it's the patterns are playing out of that turning, the constant turning. Now, if you go in between, you've got all kinds of pieces that are, if you went to the classical music of India, the talas, which are the rhythmic structures, ranged from about 7 or 8 beats up to 22, 23 beats. Okay? If you go to what we often call traditional music or folk music, something like American fiddle music, for example, traditional music, American fiddle music has an AABB structure, and each of those A's or B's are 8 measures long. Okay, so notice that you've gone from a tight circle, okay, out to linear progression across. Okay. Another variable, and this is a fascinating one to get, is you're moving from music that is primarily rhythm dominant to music that's melodically dominant over the course of culture. Okay, so Randy Bowden, who's the percussionist with the Seattle Symphony, used to be a neighbor, and we used to chuckle because part of his job was often to sit there for 38 measures, counting off each measure, hold up a triangle and go ding, and which is a little different than a drummer in a tribal group. You know, if there is a leader, which there isn't normally in a formal sense within earlier cultural time, it'll be the percussionists, and commonly 3/4 of the people in the group will be percussionists. Okay, and again, you've got all that progression happening in between. Last of these variables, and then I'll be quiet. And that has to do with the particular notes that are played. We have 2 scales in modern music. We have major and minor. And mostly we like major because it's kind of clean and clear and well-washed. And then we have minor, which sort of picks up some of the more mysterious side of things. Well, importantly, I mean, just as modes, if we went back to Greek times, there's 7 modes, not 2. So you have Mixolydian and Meolian, and you know, on and on. And if you just look at the keyboard of a piano, basically the modes are simply taking the white keys and starting at different keys. So major is going C to C on the white keys. Okay, and so you have all those different scales, each of which has their own very unique personality. There's a very particular feel to it. If you go to something like the classical music of India, they have the ragas within it, which are the scale systems for each piece of music, makes tones and halftones that are unique to that particular raga. So you can have thousands of them, okay? And then the improvisation within the classical Indian music happens within the tala and the raga. It's like those are set and you improvise in the midst of it, okay? So from multiple scales that have a more mystical quality to them, to a sense of clarity, almost in the light of reason, quality of the scale that's being used. Okay, I'm going to put on a bit more Doomy just for getting connected, and then we will move on. We'll be approaching this whole thing sort of like a wine tasting. So we'll play in the reality of one stage and get into that experience, and then at a certain point I'll say, cleanse your palate, and we'll move into a whole different reality. We'll act as if those realities are very separate. In fact, they overlap sort of like tectonic plates, okay? But for what we're doing. So, we begin in the beginning, before time as we know it, in a world of darkness, in a world of an unbroken whole, okay? That whole has huge complexity inside of it, okay? It's not unitary, okay? But it's the links of connection that most tie, that most define that whole. So we're up here in the pre-axial, okay? In a creative act, this is incubation. It's the place before I have a sense of what the form may be. the primary intelligence in pre-axial is kinesthetic. It's cellular intelligence. So in fact, I may have no concept of what's going to be, but I may have an inkling. An inkling is a bodily state. So I'm working on a piece of sculpture, and I have this piece of stone, and I hold it and I look at it. But I don't have a picture of what's to be born out of that piece of stone. But somehow I know that piece of stone is important to me. And I'm pretty certain something's going to happen. Okay. I'm writing. One of my styles in writing is that I constantly have ideas and write them down on little slips of paper and tear up those slips of paper and toss them in a box, or 4 or 5 boxes, But I have no idea what I'm going to write about, And then at a certain time I sort of get the feeling of, ooh, I think there's going to be a book wanting to happen. And I start going through those slips of paper, okay? And I'm incubating. I'm going all over the place with it. In a relationship, this is a time before formal relationship. It might be a friendship, it may be an intimacy. And it may be that you don't know this person, or it may be that you know this person very well. It's just that there is a kind of spark that hasn't quite happened yet, to have it happen, to have it go. In my experience with relationships is we think they just happen, but in fact, in my experience, it's very rare that we make relationship unless we have prepared internal space in ourselves for it. And the incubation process is part of making available space for another person within our own being in some way. In a lifetime, this is a perinatal period in the womb, first few months of life. Notice the intelligence is primarily kinesthetic intelligence. How does an infant relate to their world? As movement, as taste, okay, as touch, almost not visually that much, certainly not cognitively. Okay. What's the world look like from that place? What's important from that place? In culture, we're talking about quite a span, really, from sort of the emergence of the species a couple million years ago, okay, pretty much up to sort of the beginning of formal agriculture. Okay, I mean, for lack of a better term, we can just talk in terms of tribal culture, but it's a terribly simplistic term. Okay. That reality is defined by that unbroken whole in lots of very interesting related ways. And again, when I say the unbroken whole, I'm not saying unity. I think there's a huge complexity, but what binds it is the interconnections with it. So within, if you're in a tribal reality, what defines truth or what defines health? Well, the bottom line comes close to saying it's one's depth of connection in nature. Okay. What's identity? Identity is immensely tied to your existence within the tribe, within that whole that you are held in. So within a tribal reality, very common within a tribal reality, if you break a taboo and are asked to leave the tribe, you will simply die. It's not like anything happens to you, you just go out and you die. Okay, existence is part of that. It's also unitary in terms of time. Okay, because time, in earliest times, time is relative in time, okay, tends to be largely cyclic. Okay, so instead of thinking about progress in a future linear thing, picture, it's like the turning of the seasons. It's like that water wheel. Okay, you have the turning of the seasons, and with that, where are your ancestors? They off that place? No, they're stacked in the moment, in that reality of that cyclic picture. Okay. I'd like you to imagine that you're in Australia, say 1,000 years ago. It's a small band. It's the evening. There's a couple of people with instruments. A couple of them are long, hollowed-out pieces of wood called didgeridoos. They used to have them hollowed out by termites, and now they use PVC water pipe because they like the sound better. And they start playing. Where are you listening from? Where are you? This next piece is one you might want to stand up and move to. It's from halfway around the world, from the first piece. It's a Hopi buffalo dance. A couple things that are worth noting in it. I was talking earlier about rhythm. This is a highly rhythm-dominant piece, but it's not rhythm in our usual sense of syncopation. Rhythm, if you think about it, in syncopation already has a great deal of form. Okay? In fact, when you're moving from something that's rhythm dominant to a more melodically dominant, okay, it's more like moving from attention being from the space between the notes to attention being with the notes. Okay, so when you listen to rhythm in this piece, it's almost more like being inside the human body and hearing sounds inside the human body. Another piece with this is in terms of dancing. The key to doing this kind of dancing, it doesn't matter if the moves are accurate or not, but the thing that defines it, the aesthetic that defines it, is your relationship to the ground. So if you make the bottoms of your feet just incredibly tactile, you almost can't go wrong. Okay? Notice our tendency often with early mixers is to think, oh, it's rhythmic, so I should be stomping my feet. In fact, that tends to come later when there's more form in the music. Okay? In fact, you're going to be moving in relationship to the ground, but your movement is soft to the ground. The more you can feel through the bottoms of your feet, the more you're there. Okay? So, Hopi buffalo dance and dance. play one last pre-axial piece, and this is again from halfway around the globe. So we're playing with cultures where there's a very similar internal quality to the music, but as far as we know, they're not cultures that have ever had any physical connection with each other. This is from New Guinea. It's the dance from the Dumir. Okay, find a seat again. Might even find a piece of paper if you to jot on if you want to, or just reflect inside yourself. I'll just throw some questions at you. What'd you notice? Anywhere. In yourself, in the room, in the music? What's this reality about? What's important in it? What makes it what it is? What's important to you when you are in it? How do you get in it? When you are in it, what's a relationship with another person, with yourself, with your environment? What makes it a relationship? notice where you have to be in yourself to answer those questions. And also notice, is this a place that you can go to fairly easily, or is this a place that's a long ways from home?